So I've been really enjoying my Steam Deck so far, and considering it's just using an integrated AMD APU, it's pretty impressive the games it can play. So that made me think, wonder if we can take a desktop version of it and make a Steam Cube and play the same type of games. Hey everybody, it's Chris from FamilyGeekery, and today we are going to be putting together this little guy here. This is the ASRock DeskMini X300, and we're going to build up basically a Steam Cube, just a integrated graphics gaming machine, just tiny, hook it up to a TV, hook it up to a monitor, do whatever you want with it, and play some games. Now it's not going to be top tier, 4080 graphics or anything like that, but I just wanted to see what we could do with another little Ryzen AMD with an integrated APU and see what kind of games we can play. So let's see what we got this paired up with today. So as far as the CPU goes, we're going to go with a Ryzen 5 5600G. So the G of course has the built-in graphics, the built-in APU, and this is basically built on the Vega 7 chipset of APUs. And this is going to give it plenty of power as far as the processor goes, and we're going to see if this APU is going to do the job for some gaming. Now, with some simple Google comparisons, it looks like this is going to be a stronger processor than the Steam Deck has, but not quite as strong as a GPU as the Steam Deck has. So it'll be an interesting comparison once we start getting into some games. Now, they make a Ryzen 7 version of this also, which is a little bit better, but I read some concerns about the power supply that feeds this thing being able to process the Ryzen 7. So we're going to go with the Ryzen 5. It should be fine. Now we're going to pair that up with 16 gigs of DDR memory, and this uses the SODIMM, like a laptop memory. So we got 3200 megahertz memory for that. 16 gigs should be plenty. And because I don't want to open this thing up ever again after I put it together, we're going to start off with a 2 terabyte Samsung 970 EVO Plus, so that'll give it plenty of room to store as many games as we want. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and open this thing up and see what it takes to get all these pieces in here. So I've built many ITX computers before, and several of them on this channel. But I've never built one of these really tiny ones here like the Miniforms makes. So we're going to have some fun with this. We got a quick install guide, that's good. We got a CD-ROM for some reason. I don't know where that's going to fit in, but it may or may not be necessary. And then here is the case itself. So this is basically bare bones. It's got a case, and the motherboard is already integrated in here, and then I believe it's going to have an external power supply. That's probably what's still left in there. So let's go ahead and open this up and see what it takes. So we'll take a closer look at this in just a second. Let's see what else is in the box here. We've got the power cord and the power supply. So this is like a laptop style power supply, and it looks like it is 19 volts, 6.32 amps, so 120 watts. So 120 watt power supply to run everything, and that should be plenty for that Ryzen 5, which I believe has a 65 watt TDP. We've got a heat sink in here, and I forgot this came with it. The Ryzen actually has a fan that we can put on, and I think I read that if you put the stock CPU cooler on there and keep part of the plastic shroud off, that it will fit within the height of this case. And it's supposed to have a little bit better cooling power than this fan that came with the case. So we'll make that decision once we get closer to it. Let's see what else we got. Looks like some kind of a SATA cable. Got some screws and some little rubber feet. Some Wi-Fi antennas, and there is a Wi-Fi card there. And then a little tiny screw, probably for your NVMe drive. And then another SATA cable. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this. Just on the outside itself, we've got this integrated motherboard in here. Looks like we've got VGA, HDMI, DisplayPort. That's going to be your power input. And then we've got 2 USBs and an Ethernet connector. And around front, we've got another high-speed USB and a USB-C. And then, of course, we've got like a microphone and headset. And it looks like we can put the feet down here to sit it upright like this. And then I think there was some kind of bolt pattern here. You might be able to mount it on like a monitor riser, and then we can put the feet this way to sit it down this way. So it gives you some options of configuration. I think the next step we needed to do is open this guy up. Alright, so I took 4 screws out of the back here, and this thing slides right out like a tray. And it looks like the front I/O is already hooked up, so I'm going to see if I can do everything without disconnecting that. But if I do need to disconnect it, looks like it'll be pretty easy to plug back in. So here's our processor. I haven't used the 5600G before. I've used some of the older, like the 2000 and 3000 series of the G processors on small computers. So I'll be interested to see how that works. So we can put that in here, and I think we're going to try this. See, this part right here just snaps right off, and it gives it a little bit lower profile. I think we're going to be okay with this. It may just kind of barely make it here, but this is well ventilated, so I think that'll be fine. So let's go ahead and get the CPU mounted in there, and then we'll slap the RAM down in there, and then we'll see what we're going to do about the cooler itself. And just make sure if you're putting one of these together that you watch the corner that has the marking on it, the little triangle marking, and the marking is silk screened on the motherboard. And this one, it looks upside down, so just make sure that you do check that out first. So there's the processor. Let's go ahead and open up the RAM and get that down in there. Alright, so both sides of the ears open up on these RAM slots. So you open them up all the way. You look for the offset to see where it's at. It's over to the left. So you match that up with your RAM. And then just pick one of the slots. I like to get it in the channel all the way and make sure that it's flush. And then just give it a little push, push. And you'll hear both of them lock in. And we'll do the same thing with the second stick. Same thing, just push, push. And then once I get that down in there, I check all 4 ears to make sure that they locked all the way in. And then I give a little parallel test here to make sure that the RAM chips are both parallel and one isn't kind of like that way. So I think we're good to go on that. So let's see about this cooling fan. I'm going to go ahead and take off these stock ears for the cooling fan that came with it, and see if this thing will fit down. The cooler that came with the processor will sit down in there. Alright, so one thing to be cautious of is that you don't get full access to the back plate without taking it more apart. So what I'm going to try to do is, after I take the screws out of the little mounting ears, just try to keep my fingers on here to keep this back plate, because there's a back plate underneath here, and just try to keep that pushed up against the motherboard on the back side. Alright, with those 2 ears taken off, you can see the little mounting studs here that are coming from the back plate, and I do feel it moving, so it's not stuck on there with any kind of sticky tape. So I'm going to keep my fingers pushed up on the other side here and see if I can't get this fan to line up. And this stock fan has some thermal paste on it already, so I'm going to try to line it up and get the screws at least started, and then I won't have to hold the bottom anymore. So let's try to get maybe a couple diagonals started here. and it feels like I got a couple threads that hold on there. So I think I can go ahead and send the mounting screws all the way down. Alright, so the screws on this mounting on the stock fan here, they're set at a height that they will stop themselves. So you don't want to over torque them, you just want to keep on tightening them until they stop. So let's see what this looks like here. Looks like it's right there. So maybe a tiny bit higher than this, but that'll hopefully match up with the thickness of the top here. So let's do a little dry fit and see what happens. And there it is. It is definitely pushed right up against that. And if there's any bow at all to the metal, to the sheet metal, it's very subtle. Maybe just a tiny little hump here, but that's not going to affect anything. I think it looks good. So let's go ahead and open this up and let's get some more parts put into it. Alright, the next step is going to be to install the Wi-Fi module. So we got a little M.2 Wi-Fi module that came with it, and that's nice. And it came with a couple antenna leads here, and these are both just slightly D-shaped, so there's a flat edge on each of these. And on the back of the case there's 3 holes here, and I just picked 2 of them and punched them out. So I just put a Phillips head screwdriver on this side, pushed it a little bit, and it just kind of bent that in. I grabbed the little tiny piece of metal that came out, which is just a little punched out piece of metal here, with some needle nose, and popped that right off. So these antenna wires are going to go in there, again, kind of keyholing themselves with the flat edge, and then it gives him some nuts to hold that on. So let's go ahead and mount up this Wi-Fi module and get the antennas hooked up. So it's important that we do this before the hard drive, because the hard drive is going to go right on top of it. And it came with screws to mount both of them, so that's nice. Don't have to go searching for special size screws. And now that the module itself is secure, we're going to want to attach these antenna cables before we put the SSD on top of it. And just to warn you, these SMA connectors on here on these antennas are absolutely tiny, like much smaller than what the camera makes them look right now. But basically they're just pressed down, so you get them lined up and use the edge of your fingernail or something like that and push it down, and it will lock into place. So that's done. So let's go ahead and get these wired into the case. Alright, so because of this VRM cooler here, it was a tiny bit challenging to get this bottom one here, but it fit in there. Then you put the lock washer on, tighten down the bolt finger tight, and then I just used some needle nose to grab it and cinch it a little bit tighter. So that's done. And once we get the SSD down, I'll figure out what I want to do with these, if I need to go grab a tie wrap or something and put them somewhere just to keep them out of the fan. Maybe loop them around like that. So let's go ahead and grab the SSD and get that mounted down next. Alright, so I think you're seeing why I said at the beginning that once I get this thing shut, I don't want to ever go back in there again, just because the shroud itself is a little tight fit and not real fun to get in and out of there. So that's why we're starting with a 2 terabyte drive, and I think that's going to give us plenty of storage for the life of this unit here. So we'll go ahead and stick that in there. And we did get a second screw that came with it. And that's it. Gotta love it. So it came with, I think, 2 SATA cables that we can hook up, but no need to even do that. I'm guessing they would have mounted down on the bottom. Yep, there is mounting holes down there for SATA drives, but this is going to be all we need. Alright, so I took the antenna wires and I just tucked them behind each of these mounting screws on this side, and not so much because I was worried about them getting into the fan, but just I didn't want them getting snagged either on the way in or the way out of pushing this into here. So they're inside, right up next to the CPU fan cable here, and they just tuck right in nicely here and then go underneath the SSD. So I think that's going to hold them in place and it's going to be just fine. So with the CPU, the RAM, the fan, and the Wi-Fi and the hard drive, I think we're ready to go. This thing's ready to close up, and let's start getting some Windows installed on there. So here's the final product. Went ahead and squeezed it back in there, put the 4 screws back in the corners. You can see the Wi-Fi antennas are on there now. And I'll give you a little hint about getting this back in here. I held the case up this way and slid the motherboard down into it, and then there was 2 catches. There's a catch right inside here, just a little lip right inside here. So as it hit the front side of the fan and then the back side of the fan, I just kind of bowed it out a little bit, slid it down, pushed it to the next time that it stopped, bowed it out a little bit, and then it slid right in place. So there she is, all assembled. Let's get the power supply hooked up. Let's get a monitor and keyboard out here, and let's make it work. Alright, so I got the mouse, keyboard, and my little portable monitor hooked up and powered it on. It went right into BIOS. So it is seeing the 5600G with 2 8GB sticks of DDR3200, and in the OC tweaker, or the overclock tweaker, it does recognize this as DDR3200, so we'll make sure that Windows does recognize that in there. With this type of chip, we do want to make sure that that graphics card is getting the full benefit of that memory that's built in, since the graphics shares the memory with the CPU and the motherboard and everything. So I think the next step is getting Windows installed on here, get the updates done, and then we'll install some stuff on here and run some tests. Alright, so I brought the computer over into my office where I've got a display capture so I could get a better look for you guys here. And I ran just a quick user benchmark, and it's not surprising. Got a really good processor score, a bad graphics score, but a good graphics score as far as integrated graphics goes. Usually it's a lot less than this. And then the rest is right on par. The hard drive is blazing fast, of course, and the memory is doing okay. So we also wanted to check out some game tests. So I've been enjoying No Man's Sky on the Steam Deck, and I just wanted to see how that compared on this one. So let's load up this game of No Man's Sky, and I've got the frames per second up in the corner there, and this screen here is always very choppy. Even on my PS4, I've always been amazed at how much this thing, this loading screen here can just chug down your processor. But let's get into the game itself. Alright, so here we are in the game, and this is defaulting at 1080p, standard, definitely not enhanced or ultra, and it is getting around 30 frames per second, which is playable. You can see a lot of blur when I'm panning like that, but it's not horrible. But of course, this isn't the experience that I've been having on the Steam Deck, because the Steam Deck screen is only 720. So let's go ahead and change our display settings there to 720 and see how that changes anything. A little harder to see at nighttime, but definitely not as crisp. The grass blades aren't near as crisp as they were at 1080p. A lot less blurring, but there's still some blurring. And now we're getting closer to 40 to 50 frames per second. So a little bit more playable. But again, we're playing this without a GPU, really. So considering this is a fairly recent AAA game with 3D graphics and very, very lush environments, I'm going to say that playing this on a tiny little computer like this with no graphics other than the integrated Radeon graphics, I'm going to say this is a pretty decent experience. So the last thing I wanted to show you was bringing Steam into the big picture mode. So if we go to view and then big picture mode, and this came out many years ago, but it's getting better and better, especially with the Steam Deck coming out. And this gives you a very familiar interface similar to the Steam Deck, all very easy to control with your controller. And there's ways to make it boot right into this so you don't even see Windows. But I chose on this particular computer at this point to go ahead and install Windows and install Steam, and this way we can install whatever we want on here, as opposed to just downloading the Steam Deck OS or the Steam OS, which is basically a Linux installation. We can definitely try that out, but I'm going to just go ahead and roll with Windows for a while and see how I like it. So that is going to wrap it up for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to play around with this tiny little PC a little bit more and see what I can make it do, see what games play well and see what games don't play so well. So if you have a game that you want to see it run on here, go ahead and let me know in the comments below, and I'll give it a test run if I have it, and let you know how it goes. But thanks as always for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you do give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more stuff like this, I've got more computers to build, go ahead and click that subscribe button. And until next time, peace out and geek out.